And it'll stay Lerato Seminya for the duration of this morning. After that, I can't guarantee. Today's session is really about what Cole said. It's about being able to get over what I like to call diversity fatigue. All too often, when we think about diversity and inclusion, we think about, oh, we've been having this conversation for so long and things simply aren't moving. What we want to call your attention to are all the little tributaries and how all of them will come together at one point to create this tipping point that we're looking for. So, Lerato Seminya, MD of Chromatic Consulting, we concern ourselves with all things diversity and inclusion, especially the intersect of the D&I agenda with data. I think I want to move away from D&I being very kumbaya and make it data rich to allow, to be honest, to allow CFOs to understand it, because the guys with the brown shoes struggle with those kind of things. So throughout the morning, we will go through our agenda. And Steffi didn't actually give me so I know where the exit signs are. If you look up, exits left and right, the bathrooms will be somewhere there. I only checked where the food was. That's as far as I went. So across the main doors. There we go. All sorted. Right. So like I said, without any further ado, we'll go through some very rich content in terms of what Malcolm will present to us, the findings of the research report. I think what always comes from research is the ability to cement our thinking, our inclinations, our gut feel in some tangible data. So we'll have a look at what's going on in terms of the 7th installment of this research report. And basically what I'm inviting you to do is, as you're looking through the data, there's some influence from the Australian index, there's some influence from the UK index, and obviously the South African perspective, which we are custodians of as Business Engage. So I want you to look at it with the lens of, what can I do tangibly so to make sure that we can advance our own organizations to some of these. Some of us are here and we don't come from listed entities. So I chair the board of Kuna Nagel South Africa. We're non-listed. But if I tell you the amount of rigor that we will put through our organization to make sure that we have the same aspirations as some of the listed entities in terms of reporting requirements. Some people call it reporting burden. I call it reporting requirements. So we need to marshal ourselves through that. We'll engage some very, very broad spectrum of topics in this instance, and that will sit inside the idea of the research report. The pointer button is right here. And then I'll facilitate the panel discussion with a panel of esteemed panelists. We'll get to hear a little bit more about themselves. They'll introduce themselves and give us a kaleidoscope of stories. Storytelling is such a powerful tool that we can use in terms of helping people craft visually stimulating journeys for themselves that they can lead their organizations through. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Priya Naidu to the stage from Nedbank. So Priya was appointed Group Exec Strategy and joined the Group Exco in 2015. Before that, she headed up Finance and Strategy for the Nedbank Corporate Cluster, where she gained banking experience through various roles. She joined Nedbank in 2001. That was but a babe. Coming from PwC. Priya, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, young Lerato. To Business Engage, to our partners and co-sponsors of the report on the status of gender on JSE-listed boards, good morning and welcome. And it is my absolute privilege to be able to be here with you today to launch the 2023 status of gender on JSE-listed boards. I think each year the findings and what Cole alluded to a little bit earlier have been great. And I think they are highlighting continued improvement on this agenda. And it is becoming a vital pulse check just for us to understand how gender diversity is changing in terms of the corporate landscape. I think reflecting on last year's study alone, we were very encouraged by the continued improvements that we've seen in the space. And the gender metrics are definitely starting to improve. But Cole said we don't look at the bad stuff, but I think at this point in time, it's good to reflect just in terms of the progress made, but also just in terms of the pace of the progress and what more can be done and should we be doing just in terms of continuing to drive gender equity forward. Now, to make the strides that we aspire to, which is largely about ensuring that women can have the same representation and opportunities as men do. Discussions such as what we're likely to have here today, I think are very important. And it's important because they allow us to reflect and understand in terms of what's been done and the great work achieved. But it also hopefully gives us opportunities to understand what crucially more we need to be doing in the space and share these ideas going forward. And all of this, just to help us continue to transform the pace of transformation in gender. Now, at Nedbank, our core purpose is about using our financial expertise to do good. And this purpose guides everything that we do in terms of our strategy, our behaviors, and our actions. And in both the short term and ensuring that there's impact, therefore, into the longer term. And at its core, this purpose focuses us to deliver material, long-term positive shifts and hopefully societal value creation as well as we look to embed purpose in everything that we do. And at the heart of that purpose is therefore transformation. And for us, it's therefore more than just being a social and a moral imperative, but indeed it is a business imperative that is definitely becoming embedded in all that we do. So holding up the mirror to Nedbank, we're talking about listed boards. We are a listed company. So we've looked at ourselves. And I think when we go back to, not as far back maybe to 2001 when I started, but definitely from the time that I've been here to where I'm now, I've seen and felt a significant change in terms of women representativity across the organization. So when we look at our boards from about 2019, I think at that point in time, we had 3 out of 15 women representation on the board, so about a 20% view. And when we look at ourselves today, we stand here with 4 out of 14 women board members. So improved from 20% to 29% from 2019 to now. But we are definitely committed to continuing to grow and improve that stat. And similar to the stat that we have internally within our organization, where at the moment we have roughly about 62% of women as part of our entire workforce, or making up our entire workforce. And when you look at it from an exec point of view, we make up about 46% women in terms of the top management of the organization. So definitely making strides as well. And hopefully those strides also start emanating in terms of our listed, our board representation. Thank you. I think in South Africa, I think we've realized already, right, that achieving gender parity is not just a social goal. It is an economic necessity. And I think there's many research that already shows that gender diverse boards perform better financially, and actually they are better enabled to navigate complex challenges that come our way as well. But yet, there's been a PwC study on global empowerment, and their findings actually remind us that workplace empowerment is still a problem in terms of underrepresentation of women. They've highlighted that actually across globally, in many countries, not just in South Africa, that there's still an issue in terms of representation of women in general. There's been another PwC study on executive remuneration, which highlighted in 2023 the deficient representation of women in executive director roles within South African listed companies. But the lack of representation at the highest levels was also compounded by the persistent wage gap between men and women, underscoring that the challenge that we have is not just within the boardroom. And the outcomes of this report, I think, are therefore quite sobering. And there's a key reminder that, while we're making great strides just in terms of broader representation, that there are other structural inequities that we actually have to start addressing if we are to start advancing in terms of women leadership or to the topmost levels. So while this year's report on the status of gender on JSE-listed boards brings some great and encouraging and positive results, I think we also need to highlight that there are some shortcomings as well. And we don't want to dwell on it, but I think it is important just to highlight, we've had, that, when we look at some companies on the JSE, some still have no female board members at all, but fortunately those numbers are starting to reduce. We also see some companies who've adopted what's been called a one and done approach, where there is a single woman who has been appointed, and it appears that they've stopped there. But again, this does seem to have been rising as well since 2022. So this highlights that we cannot just hide behind policy as a way of transformation. I think real change has to come from a complete mindset shift across organizations in order to embed gender diversity into every fabric of their business. So this does bring us to an important question, I think, around, how can we actually continue to accelerate the journey towards gender diversity and equity? I think around the world, we are seeing some inspiring examples. I guess we can't look to the most advanced nation or the most democratic nation. I think my little read earlier doesn't suggest that this most advanced nation isn't likely to nominate their first female president as yet, but let's see where that goes. But there's other inspiring global examples that we can lay our hands on. So, for example, in Norway, they have mandated that large companies achieve 40% female representation in the next 5 years. Now, that I think feels like quite a bold step in terms of equity, and perhaps could be something that us as South Africans start considering as a way to catalyze genuine, sustainable change in our environment. I think in South Africa, and the JSE listings requirement for gender policies at the board level has been an essential step forward. However, after 7 years and looking at the reporting, I think we do still need to reflect closely around that overall pace of change, as I mentioned, and maybe, what can we start doing a little bit more. So our challenge, I think, and which is part of today's conversation, is to keep the conversation rolling, is to be active in terms of not just what happens on paper and in the survey, but the follow-on action that needs to come from here. Gender diversity remains a continual focus and has to therefore continue in terms of pushing and making progress, even when it's very difficult, we know. So as we begin today's event, we need to note that despite significant progress on the gender gap on the listed boards, this remains a stark reminder, but that it's not the true reality. It's actually still an aspiration that we have. It hasn't yet realized itself in terms of pure equity. So I'm hopeful that as we all in conversation today and participate and hear the insights and the different perspectives that will be shared, that we can start answering that question around how can we accelerate gender equality. So with that, I thank you. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for being part of this very important conversation. Thanks, Loretta.
Thank you very much, Priya. More so than just a welcome for sharing some of those insights. I think the journey that, the Business Engage with your support has gone through over the last 7 years is inimitable. So we thank you for that. But I particularly appreciate an organization's ability to introspect. When you have gains and when you have challenges, it's important to be able to put them against each other and actually draw some sense of encouragement for yourself as opposed to, throwing your hands in the air and woe is me. So I appreciate that. It's such a key and vital part of being able to drive continuous improvement, bearing in mind that today's progress may not necessarily be the same as tomorrow's progress, as long as we are moving forward. So Priya touched on the idea that we are moving from a business case to more of a purpose case. I liked that. It's easy to drive for purpose than it is to drive for a what. So let's find our why. Why is it? It's not just because we're benevolent. The most diverse Fortune 500s are performing 25% better at the revenue line. So don't do it because you're a good person. Do it because it's the right thing to do for your organization and for its shareholders and delivering value to them. So the economic necessity component was also quite sobering in terms of not only the diverse boards themselves, but in generating and cultivating strategy and also encouraging and fostering a healthy pipeline. I think all too often women development programs become harbors where we go and park women. And I take huge offense to that. So you cannot be up and coming forever. There are women who leave roles because they've been up and coming for years and years and years. And then they just suffer the whiplash of watching people just move swiftly past them. We cannot be responsible for creating that. We have seen it. We simply cannot partake in it. And of the last point that I want to touch on is that policy cannot be a hiding place. When you work on transformation, especially from a gender perspective, you need to work on the system, which is the policies, etc. But then you also need to work in the system, understanding the lived experience, understanding what levers you need to pull and drive to actually be able to deliver some of this progress that we so richly desire. So with that, I will hand over to Malcolm Lawson. He is one half of Business Engage. He is completely inimitable. He's fantastic, but I do have to keep a watch on him because if I don't, he'll tell us his life story, which is fascinating. But today I'm going to have to rein him in a little bit. He'll talk us through the findings of the report, and he basically will be reinforcing what I had said earlier in terms of Business Engage at its core has a drive for connection, networking, and most importantly, engaging. Their name gave it away, right? So we have to, as we listen, let's espouse those values and interrogate the data as we see it. So when we go into the panel discussion, we're able to ask questions. That's not only just my function, that's all of us. We should be able to ask questions. I'm going to run it quite relaxed so that we can take questions as and when they come, but we will then have a formal Q&A session. So if you're feeling quite shy, you can also just jot your questions down, and then at an appropriate time, I'll ask for them because questions are vital. That's how the stories come out. And if we cannot hear from you, we want to hear what's going on in your mind because that enriches our body of knowledge, right? So Malcolm, with that, please welcome to the stage, sir.
Thank you, Lorato. And thank you to Priya for that opening address. I, like probably most of you, have spent a number of years trying to get away from death by PowerPoint. I feel like a little bit like the alcoholic who's gone past the pub, but today I'm going in the pub for a pint. So this is a little bit of death by PowerPoint, for which I apologise. Not too much, but it's a little bit. Today we're going to be looking at a lot of numbers, a lot of the data. The integrated reports that the companies produce, and they make their comments on what their policy is, what their board gender policy is. All of those comments are on the Business Engage website. You can see them. There's pages and pages and pages of all of the comments from the companies as to what they are doing and why they are doing it and how they are doing it. As Cole says, we don't do the negative. We make a point of not making comments on what other people are doing and other people are saying, but sometimes you have to. I don't know if you saw Business Day yesterday. There was an article about a gender survey on what's happening with the JSE by a company Just Share, shareholder activists. And if you go and look on their website and onto that report, this is how they're advertising that report. No, it's a South African report. That board is not a South African board. You please find me a board like that in South Africa. Today, it does not exist. There are no, not at the listed company level anyway, maybe elsewhere. There are no companies that has a board of 14 members, all white, one woman. Doesn't exist. I'd like to thank our partners, Nedbank, and thank you for hosting us here today, Carney, Institute of Directors. And you see there on Thursday, Nedbank were the finalists in the Women Empowerment Principles, the UN Women Empowerment Principles. They were finalists in the community engagement, and they were winners of the transparency and reporting. So well done to them. That was the ladies before they had a glass of wine. And congratulations to Carney Africa, gender mainstreaming champions for Southern Africa. So congratulations to them, very, very well deserved. As you know, we've just had the BRICS summit in Russia. BRICS is going to totally change the way that we live, the way that we do business, the way that the world is over the next couple of years. I just want to read what they said about women empowerment in their declaration, if you haven't read it. We acknowledge the critical role of women in political, social, and economic development. We underline the importance of women's empowerment and their full participation on the basis of equality in all spheres of society, including their active participation in decision-making processes, including in senior positions, which are fundamental for the achievement of equality, development, and peace. We recognise that inclusive entrepreneurship and access to finance for women would facilitate their participation in business ventures, innovation, and the digital economy. In this regard, we welcome the outcomes of the Ministerial Meeting on Women's Affairs and BRICS Women's Forum held in September in St. Petersburg under the theme Women, Governance and Leadership, and recognise the valuable contribution of these annual meetings to the development and consolidation of women empowerment across all three pillars of BRICS cooperation. So that is what BRICS has got to say. That's the good news. The bad news, it was item number 130 in about 130 items, but at least it's on the agenda. So we're going to have a look this morning, getting to 40. Getting to 40% of women in senior positions, in board positions. And the timeline in relation to that. And we're asking the question, have we now reached a tipping point? Are there enough women in positions in South Africa and globally that we've either got 40% or we're really getting close to that 40%, that there is enough of that happening that we're having a tipping point to, you know, the changes that has been going on for many a year now. Let's start. We're going to flit all over the world in no particular order just for the moment. Let's have a look in Australia on the ASX. You'll see there women on boards, yeah, around about the 40% mark. Obviously, women chairs is another matter, but in Australia, there's your 40%. In the UK, they're looking at 40% women on boards. They're also looking at, on top of that, that at least one of the senior positions, one of the big four, your chair, your CEO, your CFO, or your senior independent director. In this country, we call them lead independent directors. But at least one of those should be held, the position should be held by a female. We're actually going to come back to that a little bit later on. But the UK is looking at 40%. Just flitting around the world in terms of executives, you'll see there, yeah, Thailand does well, China does well, America doesn't. The Fortune 500, 10% of CEOs. CEOs is the position that historically is the position that doesn't do very well. We'll have a look at that again a little bit later. The FTSE 100 has got 10 female CEOs. And if you want to have a look and see what industries they're at, because for the first time this year, we had a look at the 10 industries that, as defined by the JSE. You'll see there that you've got healthcare, you've got Taylor Wimpey, which is construction. So in this country, in the JSE, they would be under industrial. Wimpey is not the company down the road that does the coffees and the burgers, by the way. Different Wimpey. When I was still in the UK, the Wimpey used to stand for, we import more paddies yearly. Now, paddies is a colloquialism for an Irishman. I'm not quite sure you can say that anymore. Diageo and Entain. Diageo, most of you will know, the drinks company. Entain is online betting. That's coming huge. Everywhere you look, online betting. Severn and Trent and United Utilities, they are both water. When I was growing up in Birmingham, this is now 60 years ago, we used to get our water from Severn Trent. Even in those days, you used to drink the water 7 times. They would recycle the water around about 7 times, even those days. And there's nothing wrong with it. It was good water, considering it was commercial. Vodafone, obviously everybody knows because of Vodacom, British Telecommunications, Admiral Group and Aviva. We'll go back to Aviva later on, financial. So you'll see that some of the CEOs are in difficult industries. Yeah, construction is not easy. You know, water utility. I mean, you think we've got problems with water in this country. They've got problems with water over there as well, in the UK as well. And they get plenty of rain. So they're difficult industries. And then Alison Rose used to be CEO of National Westminster Bank until she resigned because she debanked Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party. So she resigned a couple of months ago when that came out. So you'll see what we're looking at in terms of the CEOs in the UK. Now, for all of you ladies here who want to become a CEO, especially of a listed company, I'm going to give you some free advice today. Very simple. You don't have to work hard for it. All you have to do is change your name to Simon or Andrew. Because there's more Simons and Andrews who are CEOs than there are women. So just change your name. Going back to the UK, you see there, so FTSE 350 companies, 42% on boards. The executives coming up, 30%. The JSE is part of the Sustainable Stock Exchange initiative. They're very proud members of that. According to the initiative, 22% of board seats on G20 listed companies are held by women. Going back to Australia, in terms of the executive leadership positions, 3 in 10, so that's 30%, getting up to the 40. Pipeline roles. You can't get to the top position unless you've got the pipeline. This is quite difficult in Australia. It's quite difficult here. So they're saying all the CEOs appointed in the last year held pipeline roles. Women only hold 12% of these roles, according to the Chief Executive Women report. The interesting thing about this report, by the way, is it's called Keeping Score of a Losing Game. Why would you have a report that's got a title like that? It's negative. Okay, according to the government, 22% of CEOs in Australia were women. Now that obviously includes non-listed companies. So yeah, when you then start going down away from the listed companies, then it would be interesting to know what the position is with regards to the senior management, the senior executive and the board, and it may change these figures quite substantially. Going to Europe, Germany's had 30% requirement for a while. That's on supervisory boards. Germany has management and supervisory boards. Generally, they've been meeting these targets. Italy is 40%. They're generally meeting them. But what I want to point out here is in 2011, it was 5%. And that's what I was talking about in terms of timelines. And we forget this. That's what 13 years ago, it was 5%. Now they're hitting the 40%. So we need to have a look at time durations and expectations. Spain, almost exactly the same. Obviously, they've got different criteria, but Spain's actually generally is hitting their 40% targets. So let me reflect now on the 30% Club. Because that is a campaign to get 30% women on boards and into senior partner positions globally. It was started in around about 2010 by Helena Morrissey. And Business Engage took the Southern Africa part of the campaign in 2013. We had a launch in Santon. Baroness Scotland came and did the keynote address for us. Baroness Scotland went on to be the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, very important position. Prior to that, she used to be the Attorney General of England and Wales. She was the first Attorney General of England and Wales since the position was started in 1243. I reminded people on the night, 1243 in England is a year. 1243 in South Africa is a time indicating you've got about 15 minutes before your lunch. February 2020, Colin and I went over to Dublin for a global conference on the 30% Club. And I remember the date very, very clearly, because we were invited to the conference and we said, oh, well, that's good. Yeah, we'll go to that. And then I thought, it's rugby season. The Six Nations is on. I'll have a look. The conference was being held on the Thursday. Ireland are playing Wales in Dublin on the Saturday. Oh, that's great. We'll go to the rugby. So I get hold of the host, firm of attorneys in Dublin. And I say, Gillian, I need 2 tickets for the rugby. She says, that's fine, we'll organise them. So she organises 2 tickets for the rugby. So we go to the conference and we meet Helena for the first time. I mean, obviously we'd spoken to her on many, many, many occasions, but that was the first time that we'd actually met her physically. And it was very, very interesting because at that conference, she was saying that it was her intention that she wanted to dissolve the 30% Club. Now, Anne Cairns, who was the global chair at that stage, was mortified because she liked being a global chair. It was a good position. But the point that Helena was making, and the point I'm making today, is Helena says it's a campaign to achieve a result. Once we've achieved that result, do you need the campaign anymore? So she was looking forward to the day that you don't need the 30% Club, that it became extinct, it became redundant because its aims and objectives had been achieved. And that's something that we need to look at with regards to the tipping point as to, what objectives are we achieving and what are we not achieving. But then let me get back to the rugby. We get up on the Friday morning and my wife says to me, we're leaving now. What? We're leaving now. And I'm thinking, I didn't misbehave last night. We didn't have a fight. No, it was all good. What do you mean we're leaving now? Says there's an adverse weather warning. And I'm thinking, we're in Ireland. There's always an adverse weather warning. That's why we live in South Africa. And that's why Ireland's all green and lush and beautiful. So she says, no, it's like we're leaving. So again, we put the TV on and the weather's like that. That day, they set the record of the flight between Newark and New York, in New Jersey, and Heathrow, because there was such a tailwind that they actually broke the record on the time of the flight on that Friday morning. So I'm lying there and I'm looking at my wife and I'm looking at my rugby tickets and I'm looking at my wife and I'm thinking, I'm really going to miss her when she goes. Well, it's okay. I can sell one of the tickets at the stadium. The stadium was Aviva Stadium. I said that Aviva's financial. They're probably more known in the UK for sponsoring rugby stadiums. So we got to the conference. I got to hear Helena saying she wanted to dissolve the 30% Club. I didn't get to the rugby. Okay. Let's have a look now at South Africa. As many of you who have been here before will know, it's historical. It's based on the integrated annual reports of the JSE listed companies, 1st of January, 31st of December last year. 292 companies noted on the JSE at the time that we did the research. 11 companies were suspended at the time, so we don't include those. Very interesting. 26 companies were newly admitted onto the JSE. So because they're newly admitted, we haven't included them. But this time last year, we were talking about how many companies were leaving the JSE and how it was getting harder and harder for females to get onto a JSE listed company because there was getting less and less JSE listed companies. That is the first time in doing 7 years of the report that we have ever had 26 companies join the JSE. Oh, and by the way, we did invite the JSE here today. They're all travelling. Don't know where they're travelling to or what they're doing, but they're all travelling. 8 reports could not be found by way of internet search. So that totaled 45 companies omitted from the research. So we ended up with a total of 247. Just a reminder that when we talk about percentages here, we're not talking about percentages of the total JSE for that reason. We are talking about percentages of the companies that we surveyed. So in other words, the 247 and not the 292. So just remember that when we're quoting these. This year, for the first time, we actually, as I mentioned, we actually split up the 10 industries. There they are, the financials all the way through to utilities. But you can see there that your utilities, your oil and gas, your healthcare, even going up a little bit. There's not a lot you can do with them because there's so few companies. If you've got 3 in healthcare, if you've got 3 female CEOs, you've got 50%. So we need to look more at your financials, your industrials, your basic materials. All of your mining houses fall under your basic materials. This year, 19 companies did not report anything on their gender policy, which I think is quite high. But after 7 years, I think we said this last year, if they're not going to report on it now, they're never going to. Companies that are listed on the JSE but are foreign companies like they're Canadian or they're Mauritian, you could maybe understand saying, well, yeah, okay, it is a requirement, but we're more focused on what we do where we are. That's not the case. A number of those are fully fledged South African companies. We identified that there was 31 opportunities within 21 companies based on what they're saying. In other words, they've got a target of 50%. They're sitting on 30%. They've got a board of so many. So we're saying, okay, according to what they say, there's 1 or 2 opportunities. That is down quite substantially from where we started 7 years ago. But you'd also expect it to be. Because after 7 years, companies have come up with their strategy for their board. They've executed the strategy in saying, look, this is who we want to have a look at. And they've made the appointments. So, they've got if they say the target is 40%, they've got to their 40%. They're happy with that. A number of companies do say they're starting initially with, let's say, 40% or 30%. And then once they've achieved that, they've said, okay, we've achieved what we wanted to achieve. First off, we're now going further. We're now making it, our target now is 50%. A number of companies have done that. But generally, the companies who have says, they've made targets that you can identify what they want to do. By now, after 7 years, they've done it. So I personally would expect that to happen. Then talking about targets, 65 are still reporting on voluntary targets. 47 say that they've already achieved those targets. Bear in mind, and we've said this before, that companies that achieve targets, some of them that's great. Yeah, they had no women on their boards. They had a target of 30%, 40%, 50%. They've achieved the targets. Other companies have, we surmise, says, okay, we're a board of 10. We've got 8 males, 2 females. That's 20%. Therefore, our target is 20%. Thank you very much. Let's get going and move on to something else. So they've already achieved their targets because the target was based on their current position. Now, this one is an interesting one. As I said, the JSE is part of the Sustainable Stock Exchange initiative. According to the initiative, and you won't be able to read it properly, but that middle blue segment says, like, how are you going to advance gender equality? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to set gender target requirements for listed companies. Now, as I say, the JSE is part of the initiative. The JSE hasn't set targets. They've just said to the companies it's a requirement that you must have a board strategy and you must report on it. But they haven't said what that strategy must be. They haven't said what the target must be. But now the initiative is saying, well, maybe you should. And I was hoping the JSE would be here today so we could actually find out, is it their intention at any point in time to set these targets? From the same document from the initiative, they refer, what they're trying to do to the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals, and obviously Target 5, ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership. And again, I want to refer back to timings. We all know that the SDGs, they want to achieve by 2030. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, Colin and I were invited to a UN function next week where they are looking at policies and all kinds of things. Why? Because in September, the Secretary General of the United Nations says that 80% of the SDGs are not going to be met by 2030. 80%. So then you have to ask yourself, if 80% of those targets are not going to be met by 2030, then the strides that we've made globally in getting women onto boards and getting boards better balanced, to get more chief financial officers. We'll go back to the CEOs again, but more people on the audit and risk committees or the whatever it may be. To get to the stage where we're getting to 40%, or we're at 40%, or we're getting near it, in the time that we've done it, is that fair and reasonable, or is it not? Now that's up to your opinion. You can say yes, we've done very well in the time, or your opinion may be no, we can actually do a lot better. But we're missing, and everybody knows that those are very, very important. They are spoken a lot in boardrooms. Okay, parity. 37 companies near parity. What we mean by near parity is you only need one change in the boardroom. So, if a male board member resigns, retires, and that position is taken up by a female board member, you would then have parity. And again, parity means if you've got an unequal board, then you've got 6-5 or 5-4, whatever it is. But you've got parity. No women on boards. We mentioned it in a welcome. We've still got 8. Yes, it's 8 too many. I can't remember what we started off, it's like 7 years ago, but it was a lot higher than that. There's the one and dones. For those of you who haven't been here before, I'll explain what a one and done is. When they had the work that Lord Davis did in the UK and was then taken over by Hampton Alexander, a comment was made that, okay, we've got one female in now, go away, leave us alone. We've done our thing. Are they one and doneers? Now the thing is, you don't know. You can never know, because it could be a case of, yes, we put one person, female, on the board, we're going to stay there, or we put one person on, but we're going to put a second one on, and we're going to put a third one on. That's where we are in our trajectory. So with one and dones, you never really know. Okay, when we go to board ratios, in total, NEDs excluding chairs and lead independents, sitting on 36%, getting close to 40. Executives in total, 17%. Chairs, 19%. Yeah, again, chairs it's creeping up. Your lead independent directors or your senior independent directors, 31%. It's going up. Okay, CFOs, 22%. That stayed exactly the same as last year when we did it, but last year was a big jump from the previous year. CEOs sitting around about 10%. If you recall, last year it was 7%. So there's two ways of looking at it. 10%, well, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. 10% is not good enough. 10% is online with, remember what we showed you up with FTSE was 10%. Fortune 500 was 10%. We're sitting at 10%. So we're in line with global averages. You can also say it's a 40% increase from last year. So it's a case of glass half full, half empty. Okay, the committees, the audit and risk chair, now sitting on 29%. Other chairs, that's your investment committees, your mergers and acquisitions committees, if you have them. Nominations and remuneration members, 37%, close to the 40, and your audit and risk, 38%, close to your 40. There, for your nominations and your remunerations, we actually add them together. Some companies have nomination and remuneration, others have separate nominations and remunerations. Same with the audit and risk. Some have audit and risk combined, some have audit, some have risk. We've combined them. But again, yeah, you're into your low, high 30s. Remember what we said about the in the UK, the Big Four. Ideally, you must have one of the Big Four as a female member. 43% of the companies have got that. They've either got a CEO, or they've got a chair, or they've got a chief financial officer, or they've got a lead or senior independent director. Again, you're hitting your 40%. Industries. As we said there, that's the industries that they've got on the JSE. We just had a look at the top ones. As I say, yeah, your healthcare, was it your oil and gas utilities? Yeah, there's not a lot to look at there. Board chairs, the average was 19%. Consumer goods is sitting higher than that, 24%. Financials lower than that, 16%. Your lead independents, your industrials are high, your consumer goods are low, but your consumer goods may be low because your board chairs are higher. So it could be that, no, but yeah, okay, we've got a female chair, we can have a male lead. Financials, more CEOs, less in consumer goods and services, CFOs down a bit. Non-rem chairs, financial, doing very well. Audit and risk chairs, consumer goods, doing very well. Members, industrials, doing very well. And then we didn't put technology in the report, but because one of the panel members today here is in the technology space, then we just looked at technology, that, you know, again, audit and risk members, very good in terms of the average. NED is quite good. And that is us. Lorato.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to take on the shock value of wanting to retire the 30% club.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I like that idea of what happens when we no longer need it. You know, what happens when we can go into fights and we can use both our hands as opposed to 50% of the population being hamstrung. I don't know how organizations think that when the population looks the way that it does, you can go into any meaningful fight and leave half behind. I've never understood that. I want to celebrate BRICS, agenda point number 130 out of 130. We are making it, so we can at least measure progress on that. I do want to challenge, though, the idea of 31 opportunities from 21 companies, in the spirit of engaging and having communication. I wonder whether we understand what this does from a scarcity mindset perspective, right? If there are so few opportunities, what does it mean for the women that are in there? What does it mean for the women that are looking up to going in there and understanding that competition becomes fierce because there's a mindset of scarcity that's created? If we understood that we need to push the right people into those board seats to be able to drive strategy and growth, then potentially we're looking at this differently and we can make the strides that we're looking for. 80% of the SDGs not being made by 2030. This goes back to that diversity fatigue thing that I was talking about. But again, I want to encourage you to look at the little tributaries that we're creating. The South African numbers are looking infinitely better than they were. The awareness, the introspection, and later on in the panel, I'll ask whether or not the stick is important from actually putting in targets, whether that will get us where we need to. Because a lot of people will respond to that, but then they'll respond simply from a compliance perspective as opposed to genuine belief and purpose. So we'll have a look at that. Now, the idea of growth and the CEO numbers, Malcolm, either the 40% jump, or I like to say, if I needed a car today, I wouldn't necessarily start with the horse-drawn carriage and work my way up. I'll just get a car. So yes, South Africa, we're making leaps, but let's not pit our progress against other markets who have gone through certain challenges. We're at the point where we need cars. The women are here, the women are ready. Business Engage has the board masterclass series, for which I'm an alumnus. I was in cohort 5. We're on 16 now, aren't we? Yeah, 16. So yes, I did say I'm young, but these are just youthful good looks. If you cut me in half and count the rings, you'll see the truth. So I'm an alumnus from cohort 5. We've been at this for a while, trying to create these systems of change. We're trying to inculcate the idea of this is business as usual. If you want to succeed, You're going to do it because it's the right thing to do as opposed to a benevolent thing to do. We don't need favors. We've worked hard. We can continue to work hard, but we need to then be able to create more opportunities for that. So we're at 10:07. We've just digested some large numbers. So I want to give the people who are twitching, who need a break, who need a comfort break, I'd like to give you 3 to 5 minutes just for that. We don't even need to go far. Just in that time, if you have any questions that you've jotted down, you can feel free to share that with me. I'll also allow our panel to get themselves ready to join me on stage. But yeah, can we take 3 or 5 minutes? Nothing hectic to just stretch legs, etc. Thank you. I was about to say, if that music didn't stop, I was going to move into interpretive dance. And I'll call it interpretive because I actually don't know how to dance. I used to, back in the days where I had a left knee and a right knee. Now I have a good knee and a bad knee. So thank you very much, everyone. I did mention that we're going to have a panel discussion. Our panelists have made their way onto stage, and I will implore them to introduce themselves to us, and we'll head straight into the conversation. Again, if you have any questions, comments, contributions, whatever it is, please feel free to raise your hand. I will acknowledge you like the speaker in parliament, and then I will determine whether it's the right point to take the question, or we'll actually leave it for the Q&A. But I do want robust engagement, certainly from my panelists, and I need views. We don't necessarily all have to agree, but I think as we're working to build this body of knowledge, it's important for us to understand that there are multiple perspectives to some of the things that we know, see, and love. So okay, I'll get some mics coming along. Alrighty, I will assume the position. So we'll have this mic to rove around. I won't necessarily be going in a particular order. I think just let's feel free to pass the mic along as we're answering our questions. And our token male is already mic'd up. No, he is. All right, please hang on to that for me. Alrighty, so let's start with the introductions, Rihanna, if you can.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rihanna Sali. In my day job at Nedbank, I look after employment law and employee relations. But in addition to that, I chair the Gender Equity Forum at Nedbank. Just recently have become the chair, but I've been a member of the forum for, I think, ever since I joined Nedbank in 2021. You'll notice I didn't say in my spare time, I chair the Gender Equity Forum because it's something that's extremely important to me. It's certainly not something I think as a sideline that I do. So I certainly try and dedicate as much time and attention to it as I possibly can together with my day job. So I'm on the panel today in my capacity as the chair of the Gender Equity Forum. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mamokete Ramati. I'm a founder of an investment company called Mamo Capital. I also serve on 2 listed company boards. And I am an advocate for the advancement of women, and I use platforms that I have to be able to drive that agenda. And I'm very excited to be here.
Morning, everyone. Melisha Wuno. I'm the founder of Ikigai People Advisory, previously the head of HR at EOH. I've been sitting on boards for the past 9 years, but for me, it's about leaving behind something better than what we inherited. I've got a 14-year-old daughter going on to 34, and all of this that I'm doing is around building and leaving behind better workplaces. So when our children get into the workplace, they don't have the challenges that we do. My approaches are very practical, so there won't be any theory from me. Thanks.
No, you already know who I am.
All right, let's dive right in, ladies and gents. So Malcolm spoke to us about that tipping point. So I just want to examine, are we anywhere close to it, in essence? Our numbers are teetering around 30s. Certain components like we saw are at 10, et cetera, et cetera. Are we there? Are we at the place that we can call a tipping point?
Okay, let me start with that. I don't think we are at the point where we can say we are there until gender representation in all key decision making has become a norm. I don't think it's a norm yet. And that you will realize by the fact that the research, that the survey that we've been taken through, there are companies that have made great strides, but there are companies that are still getting there, or some have not scratched the surface. And I think that gap still needs to be closed. Message still needs to go out. And I think I like what Lerato mentioned earlier on around the why. And I think that's the message that needs to go out, especially with companies that are not yet there. Some have made targets, but they still haven't made significant progress in achieving those targets. We still have systemic issues that are impacting the pace of transformation. So I think we still need to drive the message. We still need to push harder, and also encourage those who are doing well to start getting the message out.
For sure, I think you said it so well. I think the progress is slow and steady, but I don't think anywhere near a tipping point yet. I think that until the systemic issues are addressed with a lot more, I think, commitment, and I think companies are at various stages of doing that. I was reading some stats last night in preparation for today, and women are more educated than men in South Africa at the moment. So women have more tertiary degrees than men do at the moment. And we need to, the work that I think still needs to be done is making sure that, so in addition to that though, we still lag, labour force participation lags behind 10.9% or something like that to men. So I think that those gaps need to be closed. The labour force participation, for me, representation at board level is of course the pinnacle. But we need to make sure that we are pushing women through the ranks, that we're giving them the opportunities, that we're mentoring, that we are readying them for those positions, so that when they're ready, they're actually given the positions and they're not appointed to the positions because a vacancy has arisen, because a man has resigned or is no longer on the board. I think for me, I'll be happy to have the discussion around a tipping point if I'm comfortable that those systemic issues are being properly addressed, and that it's becoming the norm. It's becoming part of the way we do business on a business as usual basis.
Manisha?
Yeah, if I can. So I think for as long as we push the legislation and the frameworks, it's going to be grudging compliance. We have to do this. And to Rihanna's point, I think there are very few businesses that have the maturity around diversity and inclusion. I think a lot is just we doing this because it's our license to operate and we need to get it done. Where I think we need to be focusing our time and attention is the social and structural exclusion that exists, the relatability, the role models. All of that fundamentally does allow us to shift the needle. But more importantly, it's an integrated approach. It's not about the numbers. If you get your culture right, the numbers take care of themselves. It's not just about numbers in terms of putting it into an employment equity plan. And I think that's my frustration, is that we just focus on the numbers. We measure the numbers, and what gets measured gets done, right? What gets put into a target gets rewarded. I think all of that needs to be reworked at its basic core in relation to there is something broader. It has to be integrated. It's not just about women sitting on boards at a certain level. Why are we so resistant to things like a youth shadow board, as an example? Guys, they will respect the confidentiality. There are things that we can do that are out of the box, but make people very uncomfortable because they hide behind governance or they hide behind frameworks. And I think for those who have the privilege of sitting in boardrooms, have the responsibility for those ideas out there, because it can be addressed. We just have to be brave enough to put it on the table.
Sure. These are amazing. So just on the notion of bravery, I'm reminded of even things like empathy. So some of the things that occur naturally within women are some of the things that will be looked down on in terms of how we react in certain situations at work. But then if you examine the values and what the company espouses to be, it references the very same things. So what's your take on that? No, I'll come for you. Don't worry.
No need to.
No, please.
So, by whose standards?
Mm.
And we need to look at what we define, and it's an individual thing, guys. So I'm not like grouping groups of people or anti-men or whatever. At the end of the day, it's how do we define success? What does a board member look like, right? Those are the things we need to start changing. I just think that resistance, we need to understand why the resistance is there, and it's often around power, it's often around status, and it's often around merit. So understanding the root of the resistance is important. But if we're not going to speak up, who is? If we're not going to lead by example, nothing's going to change. And that tipping point will be there for our children.
I think the one thing we have to acknowledge is that we still live in a deeply patriarchal society. We do. And that consciously or unconsciously seeps into the workplace. Mm-hmm. It absolutely does, which is why we have policies and procedures, which is why we have targets, which is why we have all of that. And we'll get into the discussion about targets a bit later on and all of that and whether it achieves what we want it to achieve. But I think that until companies have such an important role to play, to be the differentiator in their industries by virtue of the approach that they take to gender diversity. Companies, big companies, JSE-listed companies, have the opportunity through the work that they do, through their culture, through their policies on transformation, to how quickly they accelerate women to make a greater impact on a societal basis, to make a greater impact in the industry. And I think companies, it's a business imperative for sure, Priya mentioned that, but there's a bigger societal impact that companies have as well, and that can't be underestimated, and that the work that they do has to be measured at that level as well, because it's at that level where we also need change, for sure.
Yeah. So one of the big buzzwords that we've been hearing in corporate, and that has become such an emphasis, is the issue of ESG. The environment, social, and governance, all three needing to be complied to. And we've seen corporates sort of embracing that. And we're getting to a point where there's an understanding that not only the E and the G matter, but the S as well matters. And it's good that we are getting into that point. And the issue of diversity also falls even within that, the S matter, where we no longer see it as a soft issue, but it's a business issue, and which is a progress that I think we need to welcome and recognize. And so when we're saying diversity, even in the boardroom, there is acknowledgement that you need to have different perspective represented on the table, different outlook, different views to just enhance the richness of the engagements at the table. That's when you can actually get optimum and effective decision making. So that is well known. So in that sense, you cannot underestimate the natural inclinations or the natural what is it, the way women are built. If empathy is what comes naturally, it serves a purpose, right, in the organization. And you bring who you are into the boardroom, and that's how you bring value in that sense. So we cannot have a discussion where there is doubt as to who people are, what they bring with them to the table is undervalued or is undermined. So that is very, very key. How many companies are struggling with the workforce that is going through stress and they're struggling? I mean, we just came out of COVID with so issues people met people-related issues, the empowerment of people, valuing people, recognizing people are also part of that S that needs to be recognized. So as a woman coming into the play, and when you play into your strengths in contributing to those factors that we know that they can, if they are not addressed, they can quickly become a financial issue very in a matter of days or so. So we cannot underestimate anyone's value that they bring to the table. Or the issue of diversity is about everyone playing to their strengths and contributing to value creation.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm going to rope you in at this point. So some of these spaces, because the percentages are still relatively low, we can understand that these spaces are male dominated. So if we're still trying to strengthen that voice of women from a male's perspective, and I'm not asking you to bear the brunt of all of them, just we will be gentle with you. What do you think is understood when we talk about these women empowerment, gender equity? What do you think men are understanding through that? And I ask specifically related to the absoluteness of things. So it's not a zero-sum game. If you light my candle, yours doesn't have to dim, is how I understand it. Do you think that's potentially where we're getting stuck? Because we're looking at it and we're saying, well, in these boards, somebody has to leave or die for me to get an opportunity. How is it perceived on the other side?
Well, yeah, I think from the male point of view, if they haven't got the message yet as to what they should be looking at, well, maybe they shouldn't be on the board themselves. No. I'm also of the view that, yes, we're looking at gender, but the boards need to look at how they are running the boards, how they're running the companies. And, it's also a gender issue, so as well as to, how things are moving. I mentioned, with regards to BRICS and how BRICS is going to change, the way that we do things, Donald Trump in America, the way that we're going to do things. So, if we're still running companies the way that we did 100, 150 years ago, which I think a lot of companies are, going forward is going to be very problematic. If you talk about, the AI situation, if the companies aren't looking at that, this is going to be problematic. So if they're not looking at these things holistically and say, no, but this is just a women's issue and, let's just leave it at that, then maybe they shouldn't be on the board in the first place.
Thank you for that, because I would have said that, but then I don't want to get another label. I have so many. But just from a research report perspective, there's a question that came from a crowd in the break asking about the representation that we see. Have we gotten to the point where we can actually identify how many are the same women sitting on multiple boards?
Yes, we can. And when we first started, well, first of all, when in the UK they started looking at this issue, it was the women just aren't there. Well, probably that's not, that's not true. We also, when the JSE came up with the listing requirements in 2017, the question was, are we going to get the golden skirt syndrome, where the same woman gets all of the positions because of political correctness or whatever it is. Don't forget that when Cyril Ramaphosa had to relinquish his directorships, he relinquished 121 directorships. Now, how can you be a director on 121 companies and give it your all? It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. But we're finding, and we've got the data for that, that is not happening. You are not getting names that you recognize getting a lot of, they may have a lot of non-listed directorships, but in terms of on the JSE, no, that is absolutely not happening. Is that you are getting, if Mama Ketty's getting a place on the board, it's getting it, because of her expertise and experience and everything that goes with that. And what's also happening is that the women either are not being invited to or are not accepting board positions in the quantum that they can't deal with. So there aren't any women on the board. Yeah, they've got 10 JSE positions. They're just not there. So that is just not happening. At all, not at all.
Phew. So to the rest of the panel, in South Africa, we obviously have race and gender as a burning platform. That's why every time we mention diversity, people automatically think race and gender. So what do you think the JSE listed boards can do to address the intersectionality of gender with other aspects of diversity? Melissa, you already mentioned the youth shadow boards. I think that's fabulous. And we've spoken about it before. We just haven't gotten to where we need to. Race, gender, disability, loath to say the word, because in the English language, anything that starts with the word dis is not positive. This is ability that looks different. What do you think they could do in terms of being able to foster more inclusive leadership alongside all these other challenges that we have specifically for women from a gender perspective?
Yes. So for me, in my experience, I have seen most of the boards now focusing on exactly what you've just asked. Broader, diverse. Diversity beyond just race and gender. Age gets taken into account, experience as well. The deliberations or the discussions, even in the integrated reports. I mean, if you read, you will see there is a trend where companies report on their diversity across different aspects, and it's become key because it becomes more about value creation, value add, and having boards that can make the most effective and informed decisions in their deliberations. So yeah, I think it's been good to actually start seeing that trend not only in the boardroom but even in the reporting.
Thank you. So to your point on age and experience, I think we must also be cautious that it's not used as a form of exclusion, because there are opportunities. Many organizations through CSI support NPCs. Why can't we get our young women onto those boards as part of the experience, as an example? For me, I think there is a responsibility in the nomination committee specifically around what each of the committees look like and the responsibilities. But I think more importantly, it starts at every meeting that you're at. And I'm sorry, I keep going back to the operational because we have to grow our own. And if people, when you're sitting in a meeting and look around the table and ask yourself, who is not represented here? Whose voice is not being shared? Because that is the value, right? The second construct for me is that we've come from a past where differences were seen as a liability. And unfortunately, people sitting in the boardroom still have that mentality. And I'm going to call it out for what it is. We need to transition because there is the value. The business cases are there to show more inclusive organizations systematically outperform others. But that social construct of moving from a liability to an asset, I think, is still in transition. I think the younger generation are the ones that are going to fundamentally shift it even more than what it currently is. But be very clear that the the things like age and experience for me sometimes is used as a blocker rather than something that can facilitate progress.
Do you guys think there are industries where that's easier achieved than others? I mean, are there industries where they can facilitate that movement easier than others, if at all? If I consider the industries that are represented here, tech, not only do we have kind of industrials, but tech as well from your Vodacom days, and then what are we looking at here?
So I would maybe like to start on the maybe the challenges or the historical challenges we have seen, especially within the industrial space, whether it's manufacturing and so forth. Historically, you would find that the women representation is very low in the core part of the business, in the plant or in the operations, and purely because it's engineering and in some instances considered heavy duty kind of work and so forth. And that mentality has been kept. I mean, to this day, you would find that catching up and having high representation of women, even though we have a lot of women who have been graduating with engineering degrees and so forth, but the culture of the organization is still very much aligned to that old thinking that to work in a manufacturing, whether it's automotive or whatever, it's still very much occupied by men. It's still very much male dominated, and it has become quite a challenge to actually see transformation happening from middle management to senior, and you see it showing itself even reflected even towards up to the board level, because when there's not much representation at that level, it shapes the culture. By the time you get to the senior level, the thinking is different. It gives a sense that maybe women are not key contributors to the core parts of the business, and you'd find a lot of them being very much represented in sales, customer service, or administration, and so forth. But what we're seeing as well as the opportunity, though, to actually change that picture, is digitization is becoming quite an equalizer and an opportunity, because now you have plants or machine operations being automated, digitally, which then creates new opportunities such as data analysis, such as new innovations that do not need any physical power or even just the image of needing to be more strong or whatever to be able to play within the core parts of the business. When we start opening up those opportunities and allowing women to take up those new opportunities that digitization bring into whether it's an industrial space or whether it's telecommunications and so forth, it then starts to do exactly what you've raised, where we now start to see change across. You see representation across, which is quite key, because then it does send the message that women are here, they are key contributors where it really matters. So yeah, I think we still need to break those. There are areas where those structural changes, I mean, in some instances you find women who say, instances where some companies or executives would say, we hired a woman, we brought a woman in at a manager level, they stayed for a few months and then they left. And the question is, but what are the working conditions? Are the working conditions, accommodating enough for women to be willing to enjoy spending every day of their lives in that work environment? Because, so inclusivity goes beyond just that representation once opportunities are there. So that's why I believe that in as much as there has been, you could have some companies companies achieve certain targets, it's the quality of the experience that we create in those environments. So really high industrialized environment are the ones that have historically had the challenge, but there is an opportunity to change that. And I think the focus should be where the opportunities to make sure that women come in, academically, with qualifications and stuff. We have a lot of women going into previously male-dominated areas, and those opportunities need to be opened up. Digitization is opening up opportunities for more women to get in, and those opportunities need to be opened up. The landscape has to change now.
And the earth agrees. You guys feel that tremor? Rihanna?
I think from a financial services perspective, I mean, when I came into financial services just over 20 years ago, I was an affirmative action appointment. There was no doubt about that. I mean, it was accepted that I was an affirmative action appointment. And financial services is a very male-dominated environment. It was extremely male-dominated 20 years ago. And I went into investment banking, and it was even more male-dominated. I left South Africa. I went overseas for a few years, came back, went into the public sector, and then came back to financial services. And I was very pleased to see, really, really very pleased to see the transformation that had happened during the time I was overseas and during the time I was in public sector. But there is still this notion in financial services that the market lacks, or there's a dearth of female talent in the market, or that women are not sufficiently qualified yet, and that when you speak to the talent people, they have to search long and hard in order to, get females in particularly front office positions. When I say front office, I mean office, client with the revenue generators in the business. And I question that. I think that's a fallacy. I can't believe that where women are more educated than men, women have got more degrees, more tertiary degrees, and that's true. But I mean, that goes hand in hand with making sure that women come out of university with degrees. And I tell my daughter this because she's starting to work, and she comes home every day and she says to me, they don't teach you in university that the practice of law is different to the theory of law. And that's it, right? We come out of university, we know nothing about working life, and we need to be mentored, and we need to be shown the ropes, and and that is what must happen. And you're going to develop the talent pool out there. I don't personally believe, because I think unconscious bias comes into the picture. Mm-hmm. I think automatically people start thinking, oh, women, this, and that. And if women have spent some time out of the market because they've had a baby, that's what we do. We have babies from time to time, and sometimes we have to leave the market, and that doesn't mean our brain has fried and that we're not able to come back to work. We are. So, yeah, I think those are still the challenges from a financial services perspective. But I say that with the qualification that, again, going back to the point I'm making, that there has been a lot of strides that have been made.
I want to say something now. It's my turn. Yeah, I think one of the problems that I have is that, where is the support structures? And what I mean by that is I showed a slide in the presentation for Workplace Gender Equity Agency in Australia. And you see the work that they do, and it's part of the Australian government. And they're really, really good. But, where's our government, and, how's our government tying in, like, with, what the JSE is doing, with what the private sector is doing? We've got a fantastic civil society in this country, but they don't really get involved a lot in, in what we're talking about today. So, there's a lot of things that can happen much, much better, that we can go a lot further if we could actually just have everybody, pulling in the same direction. And I just don't see it. I don't see it at all. I don't see government talking to business and civil society and whatever. And if we could get that, a kind of a leadership, within that, to say, well, this is what we should be doing, and this is how we should be doing it. This is where all of the challenges are. You mentioned about a shadow board. I mean, we spoke at Business Engage a number of years back about the Companies Act allows for alternate directors. So why don't you appoint an alternate director, as you say, almost like a shadow, when you've got somebody that is so experienced on a board, and they say, yeah, but I'm going to be out of here in 1, 2, 3 years' time. You come in as an alternate director, you shadow me. We'll both go into, because normally alternates are there when the main member cannot attend. Change the rules, change the way that you do things. Like we were saying earlier on, if you're going to still do what you were doing 100 years ago, it's problematic. Change the rules. Let the alternate director go in, with the main member. They can sit there. They can listen. As I think you mentioned about confidentiality agreements, all of that, non-disclosure agreements, all of that can be sorted out. And so by the time you actually do get your seat at the board, you know how it works. You know the mechanisms. You can have a voice. You can talk, because now you know the people. But there's no support structure. Now remember, and I meant to mention it in the presentation when we were talking about the timings. I said that we started with the 30% club in this country in 2013. That was also the year that Cole was involved at NEDLAC negotiating the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill. And if we'd have had that, you'd have had 50% women on, or 50-50 on all structures. That would have been a different world. But then we ran out of time in Parliament, and the new minister, Susan Shabangu, says, no, but we've got enough legislation. And we hear it. I mean, you mentioned the board masterclass series, yes, and the attorney from Webber Vensel says exactly the same thing. We have all the legislation we need in this country. We've got great legislation, but we don't use it. So, when it comes back to, it's like, your targets and your, whether you should have legislation and all of that, we've got legislation. It just doesn't get used.
Got it. All right. At Business Engage, we have a thing. We always finish on time. We understand that we've contracted you for a certain amount of time. Are there any questions, additional questions that come from the floor? Are you allowed to ask questions, Cole?
No, I'm not asking a question. I just want to respond in terms of what Rihanna had to say regarding, the fact that when we get into corporates, they say, oh, but the women aren't available, where's the talent, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is something that each and every single one of us has got the power to change. When we talk about awards, when we talk about profiling, we always profile, we talk about the golden skirts, the ladies at the top, and we really, we are eternally grateful for what they've achieved and the paths that they have created for us. But at the same time, if we do not create a pipeline of women coming through, we will never see change. And so essentially, when we are talking about women and what they're achieving and everything like that, as you say, Rihanna, the talent is there. We've got to start talking about how many women are available, because we mustn't be surprised if we don't do it and the corporates turn around and say, where are these women? We don't know where they are. And we don't want corporates to turn around and say, well, we have to allocate this one to the woman, so we're purposely going to go look for it. What we want to do is we want to get to a point where there are so many women profiled at every single level that there's no excuse anymore. But it's up to us. And that is something quite easy. We've got LinkedIn, we've got Facebook, we've got a whole lot of intranets from a corporate perspective to tell those stories. And that is why with the Gender Mainstreaming Awards, you will see it's not only the senior women. Yes, we recognize the senior women, but even somebody like a cleaner, anybody that impacts any person within the organization can be recognized for the impact that they make.
Awesome. Thank you. And nuggets, sir. There's a microphone right there behind you.
Dino Rosequala is my name. I have partly a comment as well as maybe an observation. One of the things I believe would also still happen is that in terms of the representation, it is still also going to be skewed in terms of the various sectors. Why? Because maybe in the services sector, there's a far greater representation of women, maybe 68%. But when you come to the mining, agriculture, engineering, manufacturing, even IT, it's not there. And so even as we begin to talk, and I think generally, Malcolm, you might have been talking about the general number representation, it will always kind of be skewed because we are working in, or the opportunity is in that services sector, or where you have dominance or large numbers of women. So we are not addressing the other sectors. And if we don't begin to pull in some greater mass of women in those other sectors, it'll always be skewed because those other sectors maybe make up about 25% of the workforce. The second thing I believe, and this is a bit in line with what Mama Katie was saying indirectly and what you were saying, Malcolm, talking about mentoring. At board level, they don't have the mentoring. But even further down in the organizations, there is a serious lack of mentoring. Schools, kids leave high school, they don't know what to study. And unfortunately, when it comes to career advice, the teachers are not in a position to really give that kind of advice. And so girls would tend to be pulled into what they're either being told by their teachers or what society tells them. Now, the industry or our economies have evolved from when maybe I was in secondary school, but it's not reflected. So I still feel that we are not going to get serious representation if we don't address some of those challenges.
Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, if I may. So I've worked in mining and I've got industrial and ICT experience. I think from a mining perspective, the fact that we have Kumba Iron Ore headed by a black female CEO is testimony to some of the work that took place, but it took a long time to get there. I remember being 21. I'm not going to tell you my age now, but it was like 30 years ago. And we were part of the first women to go underground. And what happened was within the first month, the slips and falls increased. So you know how important safety is, right? So the first thing back was, that's why we don't allow women underground. But when you do a root cause analysis that is data driven, we found that it was because it's men's PPE that we were wearing. So we designed women PPE, right? So those are the things that are shifting. It's not where it needs to be, 100% agree. But look at an industrial company like Barlow World. Look at them over the past 10 years and how they have shifted from a gender representation perspective. They've been fantastic and it has been sustainable. Their now CEO, head of equipment, is a black female. So I think it's about leadership, buy-in, commitment, drive, and hunger, and also systematically addressing those structural things that exclude people. So in Barlow World, there was an agriculture business, which I was part of, and we took the first black female technicians into Bothaville to a farm. And the farmers were not interested because they said, how is this person going to pick up a wheel, right? But it's through conversations and challenging. That's why that idea of what does success look like? We're being taught to compete against one another, right? That's what success is about. I've got to be better than you in order to succeed. And we've got to call BS on those sorts of things because there's enough sun for everybody to shine. But people are not comfortable with that because I have to be better than you. By whose standard? So I fully hear your point around the different industries, but I think we also mustn't take away of some of the significant strides some companies truly have made. And I think it's because of the leadership.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I love about the work that Felicia does is typically the things that slow us down from achieving progress. It's just the chasm between where we are and where we need to be looks so large that it debilitates. So when we talk about strategies, I love it when they are extremely practical and doable. My esteemed panel, we are at 11:02. Do I have permission to go on for 5 more minutes just to take closing comments? And I've got a question.
Hi, my name is Maureen Dolo. Just a comment on, we spoke a lot about the barriers that women face. And I think one of them, if I look at the audience today, we're preaching to the converted. We should have the men here, they're the policymakers, they're still the decision makers, and yet they're not here. So we're going to sit and discuss all of these, and we still have the mammoth task of going back to our organizations and convincing them of all of the key issues that we have looked at, discussed, etc. The more ownership of this issue of gender equity and diversity at large that is taken by the male counterparts, especially when talking about gender, is what will move us quicker, I think.
Thank you for that question. And can we potentially use that response to the question as basis for our closing comments as well? So we are talking about malaria to the mosquito, basically. that is what, in essence. So please, Rihanna, if you can, and then we'll go along the panel.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, and I think it goes to the overall discussion that there is still a lot more to be done. We didn't get to the question around targets and how, I think related to what can still be done. I think just in closing, I think there is a lot more to be done. I personally am in favor of standard setting bodies and regulators putting standards in place, not standards for the sake of compliance, but using that to drive paradigm shifts and mindset shifts. It goes with a whole process behind it, but I think that's one of the steps that can be taken for sure. And then I think up to all of us, like Carl has said, we all have a responsibility to try and drive that change in all of our positions, whatever that is within the organization. It's incumbent on us to keep telling the stories, to keep raising these issues, surfacing them so that something can be done about them.
Yes, I think for me, all of us have a role to play in our spheres of influence wherever we are. I think we need to continue driving the agenda in one way or another using this knowledge that we have. When we live here, we have the responsibility to play our part. But secondly, I think companies are at different stages of various implementation. Some have policies, some don't. Some are still struggling with issues of unconscious bias. Some have already passed that stage and have made great strides. And I think the approach needs to be different and be fit for purpose, depending on where we are. And for those that have really not made great strides, I think these conversations, ways to bring them into this type of conversations, awareness and engagement needs to be there to actually address the essence of purpose, as you mentioned, to address the why, so that when they run with things, there's a better understanding of the value. Yes, I agree that, targets needs to be set. I mean, we need to learn from our global counterparts on how they've achieved, the levels of representation. We need to learn from that. And human, we're driven by incentives. We know that. And if nothing holds you accountable, history tells us that, people are likely not to do much if things are not expected of them, and nothing is required of them. Things that don't get measured don't get done, basically. So I agree that there has to be targets to assist, but also the conversation around the why, the business case needs to be understood, and the value proposition still needs to be understood.
Thank you. So for mine, it's more when you know better, you do better. And I think there's enough experience in the room of people who have experienced social and structural exclusion, who are in positions of responsibility that can change that. I think the second one is about being intentional with every interaction you have, because I think every interaction is an opportunity to learn or teach, regardless of who we are, what our background is. We need to shift from, I'm here to compete against you versus I'm here for us to work together to achieve something bigger. And I think at the end of the day, it starts with us, make ourselves available for the mentoring. I think that was mentioned so many times. How much of your time is actually spent on volunteering your time to younger women, to share your stories, to guide them? Because some of the challenges we had are still there in the boardroom. So I think those are the important ones. And the last one for me, to what Rihanna was saying earlier, is create a myth-busting. I'm so tired of hearing that there is no one out there. If we bring them in, the affirmative action, or the reason you're here is because of your race or your gender, deal it with data. Because the minute you deal it with data, it fundamentally breaks down the things that people actually thought, which was not really based on fact. It's rather based on emotion. So those are my 3 things.
Thank you so much.
I've spoken enough this morning. Yes.
So it is with that I thank each and every one of you for your valuable insights. I thank you guys in the audience for being here and participating. As promised, I am still Lerato Semenya. Nothing has changed. Thank you for flying Air Semenya. We'll see you at the next event.
Thank you, ladies.
Oh. Oh. So someone who takes lots.